Welcome to your weekend. I'm Mike Krause, editor-in-chief of Complete Colorado. Filling in for your regular host, John Caldera, who's actually in rehab for a Rogaine addiction. And a little bit later in the show, we're going to talk about electric vehicles. But for right now, man, we're going to talk about some Colorado history with Mr. Tom Noel. How are you, sir?
Honored to be here, Mike.
No, thanks for coming back again. In fact, you're a historian, but more interesting, you specialize in Rocky Mountain West and Colorado. So you've done a lot of Colorado history work.
Right. Also known as Dr. Colorado, which means, Mike, I'm like the Pope. I'm infallible. If I say something, even if I'm wrong, I'm right.
Yeah, gotcha. All right. I think that people who have an interest in Colorado history, or a lot of people who have moved here as of late, maybe don't know a lot about the state. I think your books, your many books, are an excellent resource for people to find out about this new place they're living. And you've written a lot of books, and off the top of my head, I know that there's been books about the history of Colorado, history of Denver, mining camps, which a lot of people forget was really what this state was based on. In the beginning was mining. And then there's saloons, and the history of the Irish in Denver. And I assume the saloons and the history of the Irish have a lot of overlap.
Right.
But you've done a lot. How many books have you written about?
53. A lot of them co-authored. A lot of them I have help from a bunch of great grad students at CU Denver.
Right. That's that grad student program where they do all the work and you get half the credit.
Right. And I tried to give them a little money and some credit.
All right. So the latest book, we're going to talk about this right here. This is everybody knows the name Vail. A lot of people probably don't know that there was a guy behind this, Charlie Vail. So tell us about Charlie Vail. Who was he, and what was his role in Colorado? And then we'll get into the story of the building of I-70 here shortly. But who was Charlie Vail?
Charlie Vail was the state highway engineer from 1930 to 1945. And did a great job of building a lot of the passes. Got over the idea of concrete roads, which are expensive. You know, if they get broken or there's a problem, potholes with them, you have to do the whole stretch. He switched to asphalt roads, so he could build pave a lot more roads, pave them faster. So he pretty much switches Colorado from dirt roads to paved roads.
Interesting. And I did not know this, but everybody who day skis knows about I-70 through the mountains. And today we complain about the congestion. This was a remarkable undertaking at the time it was actually built, and then the planning that went into it. But it almost never happened, right? Because the original idea when the federal government was building I-70 was I-70 was going to terminate in Denver coming east, and it was going to stop, right? I try to imagine, and then Charlie Vail is the guy who really made the push to continue it on through the rest of Colorado, right? Did the federal government say, fine, you want to continue I-70 through these mountain passes, which is nutty, you're on your own, go ahead and pay for it? Or did he convince the federal government to go ahead and continue the construction?
And this is one of the few times he worked with Big Ed Johnson. Big Ed Johnson went back and lobbied Eisenhower for this, gave him a Colorado fishing license. Eisenhower loved to fish here in Grand County up in Fraser. And supposedly that persuaded Eisenhower to weigh in. And, you know, that Interstate Highway Act of 1962 is during his presidency, so it gets in there. So Vail and Johnson together, leaning on the feds, get the through route. You
said Big Ed Johnson. You mean Edwin Johnson, who was a big political figure in Colorado.
Right.
This guy was governor twice. And in fact, interestingly, he was governor during the era when the planning was being done for the I-70 through the mountains, and then was governor again during the implementation.
And then senator.
Those two are that's coincidental.
Yeah, and then U.S. senator after 1942.
Right.
So he was around a long time.
I try to imagine that if Vail hadn't been around and hadn't pushed for I-70 through the mountains, try to imagine what the ski industry would look like today. Because here would have been the options, and correct me if I'm wrong, had I-70 been built the way it was originally intended, to get on the other side of the Front Range, or on the other side of the Rocky Mountains, you would have to go drive south through New Mexico and up and around, or you'd have to drive north up to Cheyenne and then shoot over. Is that
Most
basically the
although
gist?
you did have Loveland Pass, probably a 2-lane dirt road, so you could get through, but it would be time consuming. It'd be closed off in the winter.
We closed
much
off
of the
a
time.
lot of the
Yeah.
winter, especially when it was a dirt road.
Yeah,
right?
so and you wouldn't have had that explosive growth you have in Summit County, with huge amount of residential development there, summer homes, as well as the ski areas.
All right. So Vail, Vail came up with this idea and started pushing for it and planning for it many years before construction actually began. Right.
Right.
And he was not around to see his idea come to fruition. Is that correct?
True.
And so when did Vail come up with the idea and start pushing for it and start the planning? And when did he die? And then construction began?
He dies in office in 1945, so he's pushing there in the early 40s for this idea. We've got to take it straight through the state rather than cut off the western slope.
It would have been spectacularly cut off from the Front Range. The western slope already thinks it's ignored politically.
Right.
It would have been seriously ignored had this not happened, right? We kind of take it for granted when we drive up I-70, and even through the passes when they're open and the weather's nice. This was a monumental undertaking. And so even the idea of doing this, some people just must have thought this guy was just batty. Is that
right?
I mean, did he run into a lot of problems?
Terribly expensive. It would take forever, and some people wonder if it was even feasible, or if that tunnel would cave in, or what all the things that could go wrong.
Well, I still think about the tunnel caving in when I drive through it. It hasn't happened yet. All right, so we were talking about this before the show, that at the time there was a lot of unemployed miners when construction began on this. We were very happy because now all of a sudden they had work, and this was also going to open up the mountain towns and the passes to commerce and industry. Highway building, it involves a lot of money. It involves a lot of contracts. And so there's lots of room for, especially back in the day, with colorful figures like Big Ed Johnson, for shenanigans, I guess is the best way to put it. And so I imagine that there was probably a conflict of visions between what an engineer had in mind and the reality of that, and the political reality of getting this kind of monstrous project work. There was a conflict between Johnson and Vail over this, right?
You're sure right about that. Yeah, Johnson would promise every little town where he needed votes or whatever, we're going to build this little highway for you here, and a highway here, and a highway there. Vail said, no, we got to work on one major highway and get it done, rather than a piecemeal approach of here and there, according to who Johnson had promised what to.
Yeah, we were talking about this, and I was reminded of the story of when the Union Pacific was being built, that the engineer was pointing out this great new spur that he had figured out and said it's a nice straight shot through Wyoming, and the big boss said, well, we get paid by the mile. I want to see some curves in there, right? And so this is one of those this conflicts of vision. Yes,
exactly. And they're figuring out this time where US 40 goes over the mountains, where US 50 goes over,
right, those
major routes. And Vail was concentrating on getting the major roads through.
I think that in terms of, so Big Ed Johnson ends up with a tunnel named after him. Charlie Vail ended up with a very cool ski town named after him. So I think actually Charlie might have won that battle
yeah.
of remembrance. What do you think?
And Eisenhower has
Eisenhower got a tunnel because he's the one that went ahead and, because of a fishing license, as the story goes, right?
That's the story.
Wow, that's actually a pretty cheap way to get the president on board.
Right.
We'll take that. This guy Vail, so I-70s. So basically, we can thank Charlie Vail for the fact that we have such a convenient way to get up into the mountains and on into the western slope, by the way, because this thing just continues on. Charlie Vail also was instrumental in getting Red Rocks Amphitheater built back during the Great Depression, right?
Right.
Tell the story of that, and that was a combined project between a couple of Great Depression era programs. But how did that come to pass? How did Vail get this? Was the idea already in place that this could be something, or is he the guy that saw it and said, "Wait a minute, I think this could be something"?
I think he saw it and helped implement. Cramner and Stapleton actually came up with the idea originally, and we forget Vail was deputy mayor charge of parks and improvements for the city of Denver before he became state engineer. So he was very familiar with this project from Denver. And one of his proudest achievements was that road to Red Rocks that cuts through the Red Rock Tunnel and whatnot. And gives you kind of a National Park Service route that curves around like this for scenery without cutting through a lot of landscaping, without the huge blasts and fills like you see on a straight road.
All right, so let's talk about some of the things that Vail accomplished by going. So Vail Pass is obviously named after him, but some of the other passes that he designed, is he the guy that went and looked and figured out the routes
right,
to go through? Like, so there's Monarch,
yeah,
there's Vail Pass, other passes, and they actually went up there and actually did the scouting and did the surveying.
Right, and he inaugurated using aerial surveys, where from an airplane you would photograph every section of that down to every last tree, figure out what the best route to get through.
It's fascinating. So I imagine that had this not happened, we would not have, Vail would not exist as it does today. But there also wouldn't be, if you think about all of the industries that now get to branch off of the ski biz and the mining biz up in the mountains, because there's still some mining operations going on up there, and the ancillary effect that has had over the years, that the Rocky Mountains could very well just kind of be a dead spot for the most part had Charlie Vail not come along and made this happen.
Right, I think so. And people planning their vacation back east would say, "Where's the interstate? We don't want to spend forever trying to get through Colorado." All
right, Tom, available at Tattered Cover, right?
Tattered Cover.
In fact, it'll be done by the time the show airs. But you're heading over there to do a book signing on this, right? And
Correct.
I assume there'll be a huge crowd of Colorado history groupies.
I hope so.
All right, here's the book. Charlie Davis Vail, the guy who made sure I-70 went up into the mountains, and available at Tattered Cover. And Tom, as always, thanks for coming on and talking about Colorado with us.
Thank you, Mike, for having me.
It was my pleasure.